Okay, so welcome everybody. Happy Friday. If it's Friday, happy Saturday. I don't think there's any Aussies on the call because this would be either pretty late or pretty early for them, but really excited to see everybody here. Really happy to see faces and be with you. I have a couple questions that came in, but just a reminder, feel free to use whatever video and audio settings make you feel most comfortable. I do recommend that you keep yourself muted just because it makes the recording cleaner. Um, and we all have even more than normal, just bananas things happening in and around us. So feel free to do whatever makes you feel comfortable. Um, I will try and figure out the lighting and we'll get into it. So, the first question that I have um, is this one. So, it's sort of two related questions, but do you have any suggestions how to stop running away from all of the I don't know what to do moments in dissertation research? I take them as I don't know enough about my field or the tools. How did I even come this far? Do I belong in this program? Do I need to go back to basics? Um, and it feels that dramatic in my head. So setting a timer has helped to figure some things out, reaching out for help, basically to not keep the answer open-ended, but rather state the next steps. Um, yeah, so what I still struggle with is how uncomfortable I feel about it. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions on how to work with the mental aspect of uncertainty. Yeah, so it's kind of a two-part question. The first one is what to do with uncertainty, and I've talked about that before. My big suggestions that I just ran down are setting a timer for big decisions, or thinking about decisions as sort of temporary or subject to change. I'm going to try for the next week moving forward in this direction, and then I'm going to set a timer to reassess, or I'm going to think about this for no more than an hour, and then I'm going to ask for help if I'm still totally stuck. Those are my big two things that really help. The uncertainty, we spend a lot of time in it. But as far as the feeling uncomfortable part of it, I wish that I had a solution that took away the uncomfortable feeling because I think a lot of us would love to feel more confident. Um, the short and the long answer is I try my best to put it aside. That works better or worse depending on the situation. Um, the 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 best technique that I've found for the I don't know enough, I don't deserve to be here, imposter syndrome spiral is to start looking at those claims as like specific ones and then focusing on evidence. So, for example, if your little monster is telling you that you're having all of these problems figuring out which way to go in your dissertation research because you don't know enough about your field, thinking about that as like a very specific claim, and then you can list the kind of evidence and counter evidence against it. So I love this technique, and the sort of the evidence for it might be that I need help sometimes. I get confused. I often don't know right off the bat or have gut instincts about which way is the best way. So that's all evidence that, you might not know everything about your field, but the evidence that you do have enough information to sort of keep going are the I passed my comprehensive exams, or I got into grad school in the first place, or people have looked at my prospectus and thought it was a good idea, or other people I know have needed help. I have fielded these questions from other people and we've thought about them collaboratively. But I think that a lot of the way that we can internalize it is normal. It is 100% normal to be embarking in a new piece of research that very few people or no one has researched in the way that you're researching it and not know exactly what to do. Just in the way that if you were traveling in a land where you had no map or it wasn't mapped, you would have some questions. And it wouldn't be that you don't know how to navigate or drive in a car. It just means that you've never been here before. No one's ever been here before. It might take a couple of tries to get the right way. I like to think about it often as robust research. Um, robust questions, complex questions for research answers don't have a simple answer. And if it was something that you could solve by yourself in 15 minutes or less, then it probably wasn't a good dissertation topic to begin with. You know what I mean? So the complexity is a sign of the strength of the question and not necessarily an indictment of the lack of your skills. There are a couple of good books that I can recommend about imposter syndrome. There's one that is, in my mind, unnecessarily gendered, but has some useful sort of data-backed research about imposter syndrome, and it's called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. I would say it applies to anyone who has been systematically or systemically disempowered in any way. But there's a lot of really interesting studies in there about the fact that imposter syndrome and that necessary jump to I'm not qualified when you have something that feels hard or difficult or unsolvable or requires you to need help doesn't go away with accomplishment. It doesn't go away with rank. It doesn't really matter if you have had a lot of public failures or only or no public failures. That instinct to second guess oneself or internalize the problem instead of thinking about it as part of the process is a culturally conditioned response. So on the one way, that's hugely frustrating because it means that there's a lot of factors that will make that something that might be with you for a long time. But on the other hand, it can be really comforting to be like, oh, this is a reaction that I was cultured into in some ways, and that there's a lot of reasons and evidence and elements in my environment that reinforce that reaction when I have it. So I'm not bad or wrong for having it. It just means that it's part of the culture, and I can work to identify the impacts that it has with me, the ways that it shows up, the ways that it can hold me back or keep me in undecided places. But the number one thing I think to know is that the uncomfortable feeling means that you are taking seriously the stakes of your decision. There's a reason that you feel uncomfortable when you make a bold choice in your research, and it's because it has stakes, it has consequences, and it's hard to know off the top of your head or on a gut instinct whether it's the right call or not. Lots of us have to deal with the uncomfortableness and kind of keep it moving. But the fact that you're feeling uncomfortable in and of itself isn't a problem. And it isn't something that you need to kind of like mercilessly beat out of you or pathologize as sort of a side effect of your lack of experience. It's a reaction. It's one that you can work through. It's one that you can present evidence against, but it's not necessarily a problem. Okay, and so the second part of that is thinking about, okay, so this person has been working in a way, and I am paraphrasing, that there is a lot of cultural reasons that they have been inside of an education system that's based very much on linear learning. So you start in one place, you master, you move forward, there are very specific tracks. But is there any way to, there are many things that I have to learn on the go right now. Is there any way to bring that mindset into the dissertation process? And I get a lot of variations of this idea, and I think it comes up in a lot of people's writing processes, actually, that I have to do all of the research before I can start writing, or I have to read every single thing that's been written on my topic before I can decide what my take will be, or I need to have this entire chapter drafted before I start revising, or I need to have every piece of the dissertation in the first draft stage before I can go back and revise. There are a lot of ways that this kind of linear model shows up in all of our thinking. I am 100% guilty of this. It's not a thing that you can be guilty of, I guess. It's just a way that brains go. Many people have been told that graduate school or graduate writing or the process of research or any of these things are linear, and they're not. They're often, I like to think of them as kind of a spiral. So it's sort of a repeating process. So take, for example, say you're writing a dissertation chapter and it's on a very specific area of research. You first do a kind of broad pass, right, to see what the landscape is. and then you maybe draft a focus statement, or you come up with your big idea, and then you read more specifically to support your narrower sport of interest. And then you maybe write a first draft, and then you go through and you read a couple of things that people suggested to you, or things that your advisor said you should include, or counterpoints. And then a journal editor that you submit it to, they suggest new things. But there's a constant process of kind of reading, incorporating it into the draft, reading more narrowly, incorporating that into the draft, reading to fill specific gaps in your argument, and then incorporating that. And then you submit it to an outside set of readers, and they identify more reading. But thinking about reading as not a linear, I do the reading and then I'm done with the reading process, and more of a, how can I think about reading as something that I'm doing continuously to feed new ideas into my writing process, to supplement my draft as it's growing, and to think through the way that my work fits into the field more broadly, as opposed to reading as something that I need to do and then I'm done with it and then I start writing. I find that reimagining many of these things as, I both need to read broadly for my sort of field proficiency and then read narrowly for specific projects. But if you say you write a dissertation chapter on a specific topic, and then it comes up in your first book, like manuscript, I promise you, you're going to have to read again. You're going to have to reread the things that you cited the first time. You might need to reread some of the things that you cut, because the manuscript version is always going to be different than the dissertation version. You might need to read new things that have come out between now and then. But there is nothing wrong. And in fact, the strongest scholars are continually going back and forth between different stages and what we would think about as kind of a pipeline to keep themselves fresh. But thinking about these tasks as ongoing and in various stages of targeting for specific projects or for specific needs can help get you more comfortable with the idea that it isn't a linear process. Unless you are working in a very, very hyper-specific small subfield on which there are 2 articles that have ever been written, it is nearly impossible for many of us to think that we have read everything that pertains to our topic, or read at the same level of depth, or have kept up with. There's always a process. You're always learning more. People are always adding. The learning and the skills building are ongoing. We always learn how to do them differently. I don't know about you, but if you go back and look at some of the things that you wrote in your first year of coursework, or maybe you're still in your first year of coursework and you're looking at your kind of master's work or looking backwards, you would rewrite that paper differently today. And it doesn't make that earlier paper wrong. It just means that you're a different person who knows different things, and you would rake it differently. But thinking about our scholarship as a process of continuous growth, as opposed to I reach a specific level and then I'm done learning and growing because I know enough. I'm sure all of us can think through faculty that we have known or people in our department maybe that seem to have reached a certain point in their career where they've decided that they no longer need to read or sort of keep up, and that scholarship grows stale pretty quickly. It means that you're not involved in the conversations. It means you're not learning and growing. And so many of us are really drawn to that aspect, that I think it's okay to embrace the sort of continuous integration model as something that keeps you a nimble scholar. It certainly takes a lot of humility to say, I know that I haven't read everything and I'm writing anyway. But I think it's the acknowledgement of that humility that makes strong scholars willing to take critiques when there's something that they might have missed, revise things to make them stronger. And that ultimately is a sign of kind of durability, that you're willing to accept that I don't know everything. This is my best guess, and I'm open to feedback. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Are there any questions kind of on the call, things you want me to talk about? We've got about half the time left, so there's still lots of room to think through and groove on a variety of different topics. So if you want to raise your hands, or um, you can throw them in the chat. Um, those are all good options. You can also send a message to me privately if you don't want your question to be in the main chat. Those are all totally valid options. Okay. Any advice for networking, especially now that all the conferences are canceled? Woo, yeah. I so some of you who follow me on Twitter might have known that I got really mad at like faculty as a monolith this week. And one of the things that sparked a huge tantrum in me were faculty that are, full professors with tenure lines that aren't going anywhere, are like, I'm so grateful that I don't have to go to conferences this year. It's all that travel and it's so annoying. And I was like, yeah, but for junior scholars, that's one of the only places where they get to meet senior faculty, meet people from their field, do it at a relatively cost efficient way. You know what I mean? It's squeezed into 3 days. The networking is really valuable and it's so important for jobs. So I think that the world is changing in terms of how networking is going to look right now. But the way that I would think about it is, if you have a conference that was canceled but you had sort of like a panel list for it, I would go through the list of papers and highlight ones that you would love to have seen, and reach out to those scholars individually. I know some people are really having some good success with like open, or not open, we've all read the New York Times, but like relatively restricted video conferencing meets with like 5 or 6 people, to work through reading groups, or to read or share new papers, or to present digitally. I always recommend sending emails to people whose work you've really been inspiring, or has been inspiring to you, and to reach out and say thank you. Right now, I think that there's a really good cover of the sort of COVID-19 crisis to be able to reach out to scholars that you might not regularly have felt empowered to reach out to, and say, I was really looking forward to seeing you at X conference. I would love to have, a 30-minute chat, or this is my dissertation prospectus, or, this is the abstract version of my work. I would love to meet up with you sometimes. I know a lot of people are going stir crazy. So I would say, in the dating parlance, shoot your shot. Like, give it a try. The worst they're going to say is no. The good news is that a scholar that's ungracious to you over email was probably going to be not gracious to you at a conference either. So you might as well try it. But I think reaching out and then organizing places for that deeper connection. So maybe it's reaching out to scholars in your field and saying, hey, are you guys interested in doing a summer reading group? Or, I would love to share our papers in progress. I know that we weren't able to do it, but thinking about a balance between more shallow, widespread networking, thank you emails, sort of blind calls, and then some more concentrated, higher value networking that meets more regularly is probably a good balance, but nobody knows how to do it right now. So I would say the best advice I have is give it a shot. Okay. How to create a workspace in a small apartment with no desk and keep it separate from the rest of the living space when it literally can't be separate. Whew, that's tough. Yeah, so there is not a day where I don't recognize my own privilege for having like a workspace that I can shut the door on. I would kiss the door if I could. It's a blessed door. But some of the things that I know that have worked for people that are working in smaller spaces is to make a basket of kind of work supplies. So maybe it's your literal computer, maybe it's just like your planners or your notebook, but putting all of those things together so that you can grab them quickly when it's time to open up the workspace, and then when it's time to put them all away, they go back in the basket. That can be really helpful. The keeping it so if, say, you need to work on a couch with a coffee table, having hours where you do that and then where you like physically put it away if you can be really helpful. I know there's a lot of people who are like, bed office is bad. As a person with a chronic illness whose back really hurts sometimes bed office is the best I can do. But thinking about if there are other places where you can experiment with working. I know somebody that's having really successful fire escape writing spaces right now. Maybe it's a lawn chair and a folding table out in your yard or on your porch. But I think the biggest way to keep it separate is to find things that you can either use to delineate when this workspace is a workspace and when it's a coffee table. So maybe it's like a tablecloth, maybe it's a scarf, or maybe it's like thinking about it like a parakeet cage. Like maybe you have sort of a small area that's set up in the corner and then you put something on top of it when you're not using it. But I think taking the time, if you can, to set it up and take it down would be my best advice. I know that some people are having a lot of success. There's some good, I'll see if you can find the picture on Twitter, but somebody was setting up a space like basically right in front of their front door with like a laundry hamper and a couple of things overturned. And then they work there facing their front door in their kind of like small foyer area. And that's their workspace. And then they totally take it down. But I think just giving yourself a lot of gentleness, it's really hard to work in a small space, especially when you don't really have any options. Okay, yeah, concrete tips for building a knowledge repository of readings, musings, notes as you navigate the pipeline, particularly something robust that you can keep over the course of your research career that will build and access as your knowledge base. There are 1,000 ways, and if you just Google like knowledge base or knowledge repository, and online that scholars have done. And so one of the things that I think is really frustrating is that software can go away, software can update, things can change, you can lose access to stuff. So I like to think about it in terms of like these things. Is wherever I'm putting all of my notes, repositories, my musings, whatever, something that I can get that data back out of if I need to. So does this have an export function? Does this have a way that I can, put all of my notes into PDF? Can I get my data back out of it if I need to? Is a really important. And it's why I lean towards things like Google Drive or Evernote or things that have like kind of a robust history and also have an export function. I like to think about it in terms of what ways am I going to want to search this information later? So I am 100% guilty of falling for new toys and new software tricks. But I like to think about it as, okay, if I have sort of a collection of things, what ways am I going to be able to want to search this? Do I want to be able to organize it by author? Do I want to be able to organize it by date? Tagging can be really helpful, but we can also get totally bogged down in tagging too much or, making too complex of a system and then totally abandoning it. So I like to think about it as, okay, if I could only tag this with 5 things, what are the 5 most important things, and limiting that way. The last thing that I really like to prioritize when I'm thinking about building these systems is it searchable? So are my PDFs OCR'd so that they're text searchable? And I will post some links about what OCR is. It basically is optical character recognition. So it's the difference between if you've ever pulled up a PDF and you've been able to like highlight, then that text is in theory OCR'd, as opposed to, it's totally static and you can't. OCR is a rabbit hole of questions. It's very complex, but thinking about it as, are these things searchable? So balancing between PDFs where I can't search by text, or my own text files that I can search. But searchability is really important for me, and it's something that I really encourage people to think about. There are a couple of articles about tagging and this sort of, if you jump ahead to week 5, there's, if you just search week 5 reading, there's some couple of things to think about in terms of reading strategies there too. But the most important things are, is this a system that is so cumbersome that when I start to read, I just abandon it, because that's not going to do you any good. So thinking about building the most lightweight version of whatever you can, and then if you need to build functionality into it later, you can. But having it be something that it hits the sweet spot between, this is enough extra information generated that it's useful to me, and it's not so much that I'm completely paralyzed by it. Okay. Um, Yeah, but definitely thinking about it as, this is a process that evolves. So, is it exportable? Is it searchable? Is it lightweight? Okay, last question. Any suggestions on how to balance thesis work and job searching about 3 to 4 months for completion over the course of the week? Um, I do have some suggestions, and they fall along the lines of thinking about job searching as it is any open-ended project that doesn't really have a sort of due date. So, job searching goes, and I think that some of my colleagues on, say, like Beyond Prof are much more skilled in talking about this in terms of a pipeline than I am, but I do think thinking about it in terms of a writing pipeline can be helpful. So in the beginning of a job process, you're doing a lot of research, you're gathering a lot of leads, you're doing a lot of this kind of like broad exploratory work that you would in the beginning of a writing process. And then say, you're drafting, you're narrowing it down. You might be drafting materials, you might be applying to jobs, you might be networking. And then if a publication is accepted, then obviously like it moves your timeline up, and you have to start doing a lot of concrete things that are date specific. And obviously those take precedent, because you have to be able to kind of like balance those needs and those deadlines with those external person against your own stuff that might not be as time sensitive. So thinking about the job search as, what stage am I in? What are going to be the most high value, high impact things that I can do in terms of, I only have maybe 3 or 4 hours to dedicate to this. And then being able to be flexible and say, okay, I got an interview for this job, or I have a lot of heat, or there is somebody who wants to do an interview with me, or I need to make all of these materials happen. Focusing on being able to say, okay, I have an interview for this job. I really want it. This is a good reason to email my supervisor and say, hey, this might be a week late. I have a really interesting job thing that's come up. But I think overall, thinking about it as, what stage am I in? How can I best use my time and resources? And then when things come up that are time sensitive, how do other things need to flex around it so that the my attention can go where I most need it. But in general, what I like to tell people is that in the absence of a specific job offer, it's best to focus on networking and making connections first, over applying to online jobs that you don't have a good connection to. All of the data that we have is that a lot of those posts are filled in kind of back channels, especially depending on the industry. So thinking about high value activities and then focusing on getting the dissertation done, um, because that's going to need to get done no matter what, if that makes sense. So job searching is really difficult because it depends so much on all of your restrictions, and also your own personal financial situation, your family situation, your wellness, whether or not you need benefits right away. So it's really hard for me to be like, everyone should do 4 hours a week, because it really depends. But thinking about it in terms of balancing I need to finish the dissertation or none of this stuff happens, and I can't spend all of my time job searching because I won't finish. And I also probably can't spend all of my time doing my dissertation because I won't have a job. So thinking about it as a balance that you're probably going to have to fine tune on a daily or weekly basis. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. Um, but definitely focusing on high value job activities versus um, cold applications, because higher value is going to be more time efficient. Yeah, networking is particularly, yeah. Everything from the webinars that I've been kind of watching and people I've been talking to is that networking is the most important thing right now. So making person-to-person connections if you can. And there's lots of resources about like cold emailing people on LinkedIn and that kind of stuff that can help you. Like I say, my colleagues at Beyond Prof are particularly skilled in this area, and I cede a lot of the kind of knowledge to that. Um, from where I'm sitting on the dissertation end, definitely not letting the job search take over to the point where you're not going to finish. You got to finish. So, okay. I hope that was helpful or useful. It was nice to see everybody. Um, the the thing that I just kind of want to end with, and I know that we're kind of over time, is that whatever rhythm you're in right now, it's not bad, it's not wrong, it's just the rhythm. Yesterday, I played 6 hours of Stardew Valley, and that was in some ways not great, but in other ways, it was just what I needed to do. And I haven't had a dark day like that in a while, but I feel better today. And I think that I would have felt worse if I had spent those 6 hours at my desk trying desperately to focus when it wasn't there. So be kind to yourself. When the clarity is there, take advantage of it. And when it's not, be gentle with yourselves. So have a good weekend. Um, hang in there. See you soon. I just posted all of the coaching calls for the rest of the term. So you should be able to have a sense of where those are going. But anyway, happy Friday. If Friday is still a construct that means something useful to you, maybe it's not, who knows? So happy whatever day. See you later. Bye.